Emily Martinez had mastered the art of being invisible. For 5 years, she'd greeted thousands of people at the Morrison Building's reception desk, remembered their coffee orders, knew their schedules, yet none of them truly saw her. She'd convinced herself that invisibility was safety, that blending into the marble and glass was enough. But on a gray Monday morning in October, when James Richardson walked through those revolving doors with exhaustion carved into his face and secrets buried in his eyes, Emily's carefully constructed world began to crack. She just didn't know that saving him would mean confronting the one person she'd been running from all along, herself.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
Reflecting clouds that never seemed to clear. Emily Martinez had worked at the reception desk in its marble lobby for exactly 5 years, 2 months, and 13 days. She knew this because she'd marked each anniversary in her planner with a small star. Not in celebration, but as evidence that she'd survived another year of being professionally invisible. At 26, Emily had perfected the reception desk smile, warm enough to seem genuine, distant enough to discourage conversation beyond pleasantries. Her uniform of black pencil skirts and cream blouses never varied. Her dark hair stayed pulled back in the same neat bun. Even her makeup followed a precise routine, enough to look polished, never enough to be memorable. The lobby itself was a study in corporate minimalism. Polished marble floors reflected the glass coffee station Emily managed in the northeast corner. A cluster of modern chairs created a waiting area that no one used for more than 5 minutes. The whole space echoed with the clicking of heels and the whisper of revolving doors, a symphony of transients that Emily had long ago learned to tune out. Monday morning arrived with Seattle's trademark drizzle. Emily had been at her post since 7, as always, preparing the lobby for the week ahead. She'd already brewed 3 types of coffee, arranged the complimentary newspapers that fewer people read each year, and updated the digital directory board with the new tenant information for the 15th floor. Morrison Building housed everything from law firms to tech startups, insurance companies to marketing agencies. Emily knew them all. She knew that Mr. Peterson from the 8th floor took his coffee with exactly 2 sugars and would complain if he could taste a grain more. She knew that the paralegal from Collins & Associates was having an affair with the accountant from the 12th floor. They thought the service elevator hid their secret, but Emily controlled the security camera feeds. She knew that the CEO of the marketing firm on 19 was about to be fired, based on the urgent weekend meetings she'd logged in her mental catalog. Knowledge was Emily's currency, though she never spent it. Information flowed through the lobby like water, and she absorbed it all, while remaining perfectly, safely unnoticed. Sarah Chen, the building's head of security, was Emily's only real friend, perhaps her only friend, period. Sarah had started working at Morrison 3 years ago, and within a week she'd seen through Emily's invisible armor. They'd bonded over late shifts in the peculiar intimacy of watching people when people didn't know they were being watched. "You're doing it again," Sarah said, appearing at the reception desk with 2 cups of coffee. She was already in uniform, navy blue with gold trim, her security badge glinting under the lobby's recessed lighting. "Doing what?" Emily accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "That thing where you catalog everyone like you're building a database in your head." Sarah leaned against the marble counter, her dark eyes sharp with affection and concern. "It's creepy, Em. Impressive, but creepy." Emily allowed herself a small smile. "It's my job to know the tenants. Your job is to check people in and out, maybe make some coffee. You're running psychological profiles like you're with the FBI." Sarah's tone was teasing, but there was an edge to it. "When was the last time you actually talked to someone? Like, really talked?" "I talked to you? I don't count. I'm professionally nosy. It's literally my job." Sarah's expression softened. "I'm just saying, you're 26. You should be out there living, not hiding behind this desk, cataloging other people's lives." Before Emily could respond, the revolving doors swept open, bringing a gust of October wind and a man Emily had never seen before. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it all night. Expensive suit, but worn carelessly. The tie loosened, the jacket wrinkled. He carried a leather messenger bag that had seen better days, and a silver laptop case that probably cost more than Emily's monthly rent. But it was his face that caught her attention. Exhaustion lived there, carved into the shadows under his eyes, the tight line of his jaw, the way his shoulders curved forward like he was carrying a weight that no one else could see. Emily's receptionist instincts kicked in. "Good morning. Welcome to Morrison Building. Are you here for an appointment?" The man stopped, seeming surprised to be addressed. Up close, she could see he was probably in his early 30s. There was a fading tan line on his ring finger. Recently divorced, Emily cataloged automatically. His eyes were blue, the kind of blue that looked gray in certain light, and right now they looked like storm clouds. "James Richardson," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "I'm the new tenant on 15. Should have received the access information?" Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard, pulling up the file. "Yes, Mr. Richardson. Richardson Technology Solutions. We've been expecting you." She printed his access badge with smooth efficiency, the laminator humming softly. "You're taking the entire 15th floor. That's quite an expansion." Something flickered across his face, pride maybe, or pain. Hard to tell. Something like that. Sarah had straightened, her security senses activated by a new face. She stepped forward, extending her hand. "Sarah Chen, head of security. I'll need to verify your ID and get you set up with the biometric access for after hours." James shifted his bag to shake her hand. As he pulled out his wallet for his ID, Emily noticed the slight tremor in his fingers. Not nervousness, exhaustion. This was a man running on empty. The setup process took 15 minutes. Emily explained the building amenities with practiced efficiency. The parking garage access, the package delivery protocol, the coffee station, and the rooftop garden that most tenants forgot existed. James nodded along, but I could tell he was barely processing the information. His eyes kept drifting to the elevator bank, as if he couldn't wait to disappear behind those doors and into whatever work awaited him on the 15th floor. "One more thing," Emily said, surprising herself. She reached under the counter and pulled out one of the small welcome packages she prepared for new tenants. A Morrison Building mug, some local coffee samples, and a guide to nearby restaurants. "Welcome to the building, Mr. Richardson." James looked at the package like he'd forgotten people could be kind for no reason. Thank you. You didn't have to do that." "It's what I do," Emily said simply. He nodded slowly, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then he took the package, gathered his things, and walked toward the elevators. Emily watched him go, adding him to her mental catalog. James Richardson, 15, recently divorced, running from something, probably a workaholic, definitely in pain.
Sarah waited until the elevator doors closed before turning to Emily with raised eyebrows. "Well, don't start. I didn't say anything. You're thinking it loudly." Emily turned back to her computer, pulling up the day's schedule. "I'm just observing that you looked at him differently." Sarah's voice was gentle, probing, like you actually saw him instead of just cataloging him. Emily's fingers paused on the keyboard. Had she? No, she was just doing her job. James Richardson was just another tenant, another person passing through her lobby, another life she'd observed from her safe distance. But that night, as Emily locked up the coffee station and prepared to head home to her studio apartment and her routine of frozen dinner and Netflix, she found herself glancing at the 15th floor indicator. The light was still on. James Richardson was still up there, still working, still running from whatever he was running from. And for the first time in 5 years, Emily wondered what it would be like to stop being invisible, to be seen, to see someone, really see them, beyond the catalog entries and the careful distance. The thought terrified her. She pushed it away, grabbed her bag, and headed for the bus stop. Some thoughts were too dangerous to entertain. Some walls were built for good reasons. Emily had spent 5 years making sure no one saw her because if they looked too closely, they might see the truth she'd been hiding. They might see the girl who'd fled from Seattle to Portland and back again, trying to outrun her own ambition. They might see the coward who chose invisibility over the risk of being extraordinary and failing. As the bus carried her through rain-slicked streets toward her small apartment, Emily stared at her reflection in the window. The invisible woman stared back, and Emily couldn't decide if she was her greatest achievement or her biggest regret. Emily thought she had James Richardson figured out, another workaholic using success to outrun pain. But when he started appearing at her desk every morning, not for coffee but for conversation, her careful catalog began to fail her. She couldn't categorize the way he listened, really listened, like her words mattered. She couldn't file away the warmth that bloomed in her chest when he smiled. And when he asked her about the law school textbook she'd forgotten on her desk, the one she'd hidden for 5 years, Emily realized that being seen was more terrifying than any failure. Because now someone knew her secret, and worse, someone cared.
3 weeks passed before Emily admitted to herself that something had changed. James Richardson had fallen into a pattern, arriving at 7:30 each morning, leaving well after 10 each night. But unlike the other tenants Emily had cataloged over the years, James didn't treat her like part of the furniture. Every morning, he stopped at her desk. Not for long, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but he stopped. He'd ask about her weekend or comment on the weather, or mention something random he'd heard on the news. Small talk, meaningless, the kind of interaction Emily usually deflected with professional pleasantness. Except with James, she found herself answering honestly, found herself asking questions back, found herself looking forward to 7:30 in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. Sarah noticed, of course. Sarah noticed everything. "He's doing it again," Sarah murmured on a Wednesday morning, watching from her security station as James left Emily's desk with something that almost looked like a smile. "Who's doing what?" Emily busied herself with straightening the already straight newspaper display. "Your mysterious CEO. That's the 4th time this week he's stopped to chat. And before you say it's just pleasantries, I've worked here 3 years. Nobody stops to chat with the receptionist unless they're hitting on her or they're lonely as hell." She paused. Maybe both. Emily's stomach did an unwelcome flip. "He's just being friendly." "Uh-huh, and you're just being friendly back. That's why you started wearing your hair down on Tuesdays and Thursdays." Emily caught herself. She had started wearing her hair down more often. When did that happen? "It's more comfortable." "Right. And the fact that he mentioned once that he liked your hair down has nothing to do with it?" Emily felt heat creep up her neck. Had James said that? Yes, 2 weeks ago. Such a casual comment that she'd pretended not to notice. Except she had noticed. Apparently, her subconscious had noticed even more. "Sarah, don't." Emily's voice came out sharper than intended. "Don't make this into something it's not." Sarah's expression shifted from teasing to concerned. She moved closer, lowering her voice. I'm not trying to make anything into anything. I've known you for 3 years. You don't let people in, and maybe that's fine. Maybe that's your choice. But this guy, I see the way you light up when he walks in. I also see the way you panic afterward, like you've done something wrong by being happy for 30 seconds. The observation hit too close to home. Emily turned away, pretending to check something on her computer. "I should start the afternoon coffee prep. It's 9:30 in the morning. Then I have other work to do." Sarah sighed, but didn't push further. She squeezed Emily's shoulder once, a gesture of solidarity and concern, then returned to her security station. Emily was left alone with the uncomfortable truth of Sarah's words settling in her chest like stones. The day progressed in its usual rhythm. Tenants came and went. Packages arrived. Emily handled 3 courier deliveries, 2 visitor check-ins, and 1 minor crisis when the elevator to the 14th floor malfunctioned. She was professional,
Efficient, invisible. At noon, Emily took her lunch break on the rooftop. Most tenants didn't know the rooftop existed. It wasn't advertised, and access required a special key card that only long-term building staff possessed. It was Emily's sanctuary, a place where she could drop the reception desk smile and just breathe. The rooftop garden wasn't much. A few planters with hardy shrubs, 2 weather-worn benches, a view of Seattle's skyline partially obscured by taller buildings. But it was quiet, private, hers. Emily unwrapped her sandwich, turkey and Swiss, the same lunch she'd eaten for 5 years, and pulled out her book. Not pleasure reading. Never pleasure reading. Constitutional Law, 4th edition. A textbook she'd kept from her single semester at Seattle University Law School. The semester that had ended in spectacular failure and sent her running. She'd been reading the same chapter for 3 months, not because it was difficult, but because every time she opened the book, shame flooded through her so intensely that she could barely focus on the words. She kept trying anyway, punishing herself with the reminder of who she'd almost been and who she'd chosen not to become. I didn't know anyone else came up here. Emily's head snapped up so fast her neck cracked. James Richardson stood near the rooftop access door, looking as surprised as she felt. Emily scrambled to close the textbook, but she wasn't fast enough. James's eyes had already tracked to the cover, registering the title. Constitutional Law, James said, walking closer, not invasively close, just close enough to see better. Heavy lunch reading. Emily's first instinct was to deflect, to make some joke about insomnia remedies, to rebuild the wall he'd somehow breached just by being here. But the genuine curiosity in his voice stopped her. There was no judgment there, just interest. Old textbook, she heard herself say, from college. Law school? James settled on the other bench, not next to her, but near enough for conversation. He had his own lunch, I noticed, a sad-looking protein bar and a bottle of water. Did you practice? And there it was, the question Emily had spent 5 years avoiding, the question that led to all the other questions, the ones that peeled back her careful invisibility and exposed the raw truth underneath. She could lie, should lie, but something about the rooftop, about the gray Seattle sky, about the way James sat there looking like he actually cared about her answer, something about all of it made the truth slip out before she could stop it. No, I dropped out after 1 semester. The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and exposed. Emily waited for the follow-up questions, the polite confusion, the inevitable judgment. But James just nodded slowly, like he'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Law school's brutal, he said simply. One of my best friends made it through 3 years before he realized he'd rather die than spend his life in courtrooms. Emily blinked. That was not the response she'd expected. What did he do instead? Opened a brewery in Portland. Last I heard, he's much happier. Significantly poorer, but happier. James took a bite of his protein bar, made a face. God, these things are terrible. Why do I keep buying them? The casual shift in topic felt like permission to breathe again. Emily found herself relaxing slightly, the knot of shame in her chest loosening just a fraction. Because you don't give yourself time for real meals.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
James laughed, actually laughed. It transformed his face completely, chasing away the exhaustion for just a moment. Okay, fair point. You got me. He gestured to her sandwich. You prep that yourself every day? Every Sunday night. 5 lunches, all the same. Efficient. Boring, Emily countered, surprising herself with her honesty. Maybe. Or maybe it's one less decision in a day full of decisions. James' expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. I've been eating these protein bars for 8 months. Same flavor, every single day. You know why? Emily shook her head. Because my ex-wife used to make my lunch every morning. Nothing fancy, usually leftovers from dinner, maybe a sandwich. But she'd pack it, and I'd grab it on my way out, and I never had to think about it. James stared at his protein bar like it had personally wronged him. After the divorce, I stood in my kitchen one morning trying to figure out what the hell to pack for lunch, and I just couldn't. Too many options, too many reminders that she wasn't there anymore. So I bought a box of these, and I haven't thought about lunch since.
The confession landed between them, raw and real. Emily understood instantly the comfort of routine, the safety of not having to choose, the way small, meaningless tasks could become unbearable when they reminded you of everything you'd lost. "That's why you work such long hours," Emily said softly. Not a question, an observation. James met her eyes, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Really looked. Two people who'd become experts at not being seen, suddenly visible to each other in a way that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Empty apartment's depressing," James said finally. "At least at work, I'm useful. I'm building something. At home, I'm just alone." Emily knew that feeling intimately. Her studio apartment was barely decorated, just a place to sleep between shifts. She'd lived there for 4 years and still hadn't hung anything on the walls. What was the point of making a home when you were just hiding? "The rooftop's better than both," Emily offered. "Empty office, empty apartment. At least up here, you're alone on purpose." James smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes. "Is that why you come up here? To be alone on purpose?" "That and Sarah won't stop trying to psychoanalyze me in the lobby." "The security guard? She seems sharp. Terrifyingly sharp. She's my best friend and my worst nightmare." I paused. "She warned me about you, actually." James raised his eyebrows. "Warned me? Should I be offended?" "She said you were either hitting on me or lonely as hell." "Ah." James looked down at his protein bar, then back at Emily. "What if it's both?" Emily's breath caught. There it was. The truth. Laid out simply and directly. No games, no pretense. Just honest vulnerability from a man who looked like he'd forgotten how to be anything but honest. "Then I'd say we're both in trouble," Emily whispered. Yeah, I think we are." They finished their lunches in companionable silence, the Seattle skyline stretching out before them, the October wind carrying the promise of rain. When Emily's phone alarm went off, reminding her that her break was over, she stood reluctantly. "I should get back." "Emily," James said, stopping her. "The textbook. You should keep reading it." She tensed immediately. "Why?" "Because you brought it up here for a reason. Maybe not to read it today or even this month, but someday." He stood to, collecting his trash, and because dropping out doesn't mean you're not still the person who was smart enough to get into law school in the first place. The words hit Emily square in the chest, finding the soft spot she'd armored over for 5 years. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded and headed for the door. But as she descended the stairs back to the lobby, back to her reception desk and her carefully maintained invisibility, Emily felt something shift inside her. James Richardson had seen her textbook, had heard her confession, and hadn't looked at her with pity or judgment. He looked at her like she was still someone worth knowing. That afternoon, when James came through the lobby at 6:30, earlier than his usual departure, he stopped at her desk again. "I'm trying something new. Leaving at a reasonable hour, going home, maybe cooking an actual meal instead of eating protein bar number 4. Emily smiled. "That's very brave of you." "I'm terrified. And you know what would make it less terrifying?" Emily's heart started pounding. She knew what he was going to ask, knew she should say no, knew this was exactly the kind of complication she'd spent 5 years avoiding. "Having dinner with someone," James continued. "Not a date, just dinner. With another human being. Someone who understands what it's like to hide in routines because the alternative is too scary." "Say no," Emily's survival instinct screamed. "Say you're busy. Say you don't date tenants. Say anything except..." "Okay," Emily heard herself say. "When?" "Tonight. There is a Thai place 2 blocks over. We could walk." "I get off at 7. I'll wait." And he did. James Richardson sat in the lobby for 30 minutes, working on his laptop, glancing up every time Emily helped a tenant or answered the phone. Sarah shot Emily approximately 15,000 knowing looks. Emily ignored all of them. At 7, Emily locked up the coffee station, grabbed her coat, and met James by the elevators. They walked out into the October evening together, and Emily felt the first crack form in the wall she'd built around herself. She didn't know yet that the wall was about to come crashing down. didn't know that dinner would turn into conversation that would stretch past midnight, didn't know that in 3 weeks she'd be completely, terrifyingly in love with a man who was about to shatter everything she thought she knew about herself. All she knew was that for the first time in 5 years, Emily Martinez was choosing to be visible, and it felt like stepping off a cliff. For 6 weeks, Emily let herself believe in the fairy tale. Coffee every morning, lunch on the rooftop, dinners that turned into late-night conversations where James told her about his failed marriage and she told him about her abandoned dreams. She even started rereading her law school textbooks, thinking maybe it wasn't too late to try again. Sarah called her reckless. Emily called it hope. Then Victoria Richardson walked through the Morrison Building's doors, elegant, composed, very much James's ex-wife, who maybe wasn't so ex after all. And Emily learned that some walls exist for good reasons.
The thing about hope is that it makes you stupid. Emily had learned this lesson before, painfully, expensively, during that single semester of law school when she'd believed she could be someone different, someone extraordinary. When that dream collapsed, she promised herself she'd never be that naive again. She'd spent 5 years keeping that promise. 6 weeks with James Richardson, and she'd broken it completely. They'd fallen into a pattern that felt dangerously like a relationship, though neither of them called it that. Coffee at 7:30, lunch on the rooftop whenever their schedules aligned, dinner 3 or 4 times a week at the Thai place or the Italian restaurant around the corner, or occasionally at James's apartment where he'd attempt to cook something that usually ended with them ordering takeout. Emily had met his business partner, Marcus, a sharp-eyed man who'd looked at her with open curiosity and asked James later, loudly enough for Emily to hear, "Since when do you date receptionists?" James had responded with something Emily couldn't hear, but Marcus had laughed and clapped him on the shoulder, and Emily had pretended the comment didn't sting. She'd started keeping different books at the reception desk, not just the law textbook. James had encouraged her to dig out her other books from that abandoned semester. Constitutional law sat alongside criminal procedure and a worn copy of civil litigation. She read during slow periods, making notes in the margins, feeling something in her chest unfurl like a flower that had been closed too long. Sarah watched all of this with increasing alarm. "You're in too deep," Sarah said one morning, catching Emily smiling at nothing, or rather at the text message from James about a terrible meeting with investors. I love seeing you happy, but you need to be careful." "I am being careful." "No, you're not. You're falling in love with a man you barely know." "I know him." Emily's defense sounded weak even to her own ears. "You know what he's told you. You know the version of himself he's chosen to show you." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Has he introduced you to anyone besides Marcus? Has he taken you anywhere public where you might run into people he knows?" Emily opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, because no, James hadn't done those things. Their relationship, if that's what it was, existed in small, private spaces. The rooftop, the Thai restaurant that was always empty on weeknights, his apartment. Emily had told herself this was because James valued privacy, because he was still healing from his divorce. But Sarah's question planted a seed of doubt that Emily couldn't quite ignore. That doubt grew into certainty on a Tuesday morning in late November. Emily was arranging the coffee station when the revolving doors swept open, bringing in a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in a camel coat that probably cost more than Emily's entire wardrobe. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been invisible a day in her life. "Good morning," Emily said automatically, shifting into reception mode. "How can I help you?" "I'm here to see James Richardson, 15th floor." The woman's voice matched her appearance, smooth, cultured, used to being accommodated. "I'm Victoria Richardson." The name hit Emily like cold water. Richardson, James's ex-wife, except James had said the divorce was final, had implied that Victoria was firmly in his past.
It never once mentioned that she might still be in his life in any capacity. "Do you have an appointment?" Emily kept her voice professionally neutral, even as her heart started pounding. "I don't need an appointment. I'm his wife. Well, technically ex-wife, though that's somewhat complicated at the moment." Complicated. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Emily wanted to ask what complicated meant, wanted to demand details, wanted to run up to the 15th floor and ask James what the hell was going on. Instead, she picked up the phone with steady hands and called James's office. "Mr. Richardson, Victoria Richardson is here to see you." There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then James's voice, tight with something Emily couldn't identify. "Send her up." Emily printed a visitor badge, her hands moving through the routine while her mind spun. Victoria took the badge without thanking her, without really looking at her at all. Why would she? Emily was just the receptionist, just part of the furniture, just invisible. Except Emily wasn't invisible to James, or so she'd thought. Victoria disappeared into the elevator, and Emily sat at her desk feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her. Sarah appeared moments later, having watched the whole interaction from the security station. Don't. Emily's voice came out harder than intended. Just don't. But Sarah didn't leave. She stood there, a solid presence of concern and friendship, until Emily finally looked up at her. Why didn't he tell me she was coming? I don't know. Maybe he didn't know. He knew. You saw his face when I called up. He knew. Emily's hands were shaking now. She pressed them flat against the desk. What if you were right? What if I don't actually know him at all? Sarah didn't answer. There was no good answer. Victoria stayed on the 15th floor for 2 hours. Emily tracked her presence like a wound she couldn't stop probing. At 11:30, Victoria emerged from the elevator alone, looking satisfied in a way that made Emily's stomach turn. She walked past the reception desk without a glance, out through the revolving doors and into a waiting town car. James didn't come down for their usual lunch. At 12:15, Emily went to the rooftop anyway, telling herself she wasn't waiting for him, she just wanted her normal routine. But when 12:30 came and went with no sign of James, Emily had to admit the truth. She'd been stood up. Or not stood up exactly, because they'd never actually made plans. They'd just fallen into a pattern, and Emily had mistaken that pattern for something real, something solid. Now that pattern was broken, and Emily was left holding the pieces of her own stupid hope. She was packing up her lunch when the rooftop door opened. James appeared looking haggard in a way that had nothing to do with work exhaustion. I'm sorry, I know I'm late. I got caught up with your ex-wife, the one who's apparently complicated. James winced. You talked to Victoria. She introduced herself, very friendly, mentioned how the divorce is complicated. Funny, you never mentioned anything being complicated. You said it was final. You said it was over. It is over. The divorce is final. We signed papers. Everything's legal and done. Then what's complicated, James? Emily heard a voice rising and didn't care. 6 weeks of carefully controlled invisibility were cracking apart.
James ran his hands through his hair, that familiar gesture that Emily had found endearing 6 weeks ago, and now just looked like guilt. Victoria and I are in business together. The company, Richardson Tech, she's a silent partner. She provided half the initial investment capital. Emily felt something cold settle in her chest. You never mentioned that. I didn't think it mattered. The business relationship is separate from our personal history. Does she know about me? The pause before James answered told Emily everything she needed to know. James, does your ex-wife know you've been dating your building's receptionist? We haven't been dating, James said, and Emily felt that cold thing in her chest spread, numbing her from the inside out. We've been spending time together, getting to know each other. It's not, I never said we were in a relationship. He was right, technically completely right. They'd never defined what they were doing, never put labels on their late-night conversations or their standing lunch dates. Emily had just assumed, had let herself hope, had been stupid enough to think that being seen by someone meant being chosen by them. "You're right," Emily said, her voice hollow. "We never said what this was. That was my mistake." "Em, that's not what I meant." "Don't call me that. Sarah calls me that. You call me Emily." She grabbed her textbook, hugging it to her chest like armor. "I need to get back to work." "Please, just let me explain." "Explain what? That you've been using me as a distraction while you figure out your complicated situation with your ex-wife, and that I was convenient because I work in your building and listen to your problems and don't ask for anything more than you're willing to give?" Emily was at the door now, hand on the handle. "You don't owe me an explanation, James. We weren't dating, remember? I was just the receptionist you occasionally had dinner with." "That's not fair." "No," Emily agreed. "What's not fair is letting someone believe they matter to you when they don't." She left before he could respond, before the tears burning behind her eyes could fall, before she could do something even more humiliating, like beg him to tell her she was wrong. The afternoon was torture. James came through the lobby at 1:30, clearly wanting to talk, but Emily was helping a tenant and pretended not to see him. He came down again at 4. Emily was on a phone call. At 6, he actually approached the desk, and Emily looked up at him with her reception desk smile, the professional, distant one she'd perfected 5 years ago, and asked, "How can I help you, Mr. Richardson?" The formal address hit him like a slap. James's face went through several emotions before settling on resigned sadness. "I'll be working late tonight. No need to wait." "I wasn't planning to." "Have a good evening." She maintained that pleasant, distant professionalism for the rest of the week. James stopped approaching the desk, stopped coming to the rooftop at lunch, stopped existing in Emily's space except as another tenant in the building, another name on her catalog of people who passed through her lobby without really seeing her. Sarah didn't say, "I told you so," which was somehow worse. Instead, she just brought Emily coffee and sat with her during lunch breaks, not offering advice, just being present while Emily's brief experiment in visibility crumbled back into comfortable, safe invisibility. The law textbooks went back under the desk. Emily's hair went back up in its neat bun. The cracks in her careful armor sealed themselves, and Emily Martinez returned to being the woman she'd been for 5 years. Professionally pleasant, perfectly invisible. Safely alone. Except now, she knew what she was missing. Now she knew what it felt like to be seen, to matter, to hope for something more. And that knowledge made the invisibility feel less like safety and more like a prison she built for herself. On Friday night, as Emily locked up the coffee station and prepared to go home to her empty apartment, she caught her reflection in the lobby's glass walls. The invisible woman stared back, and for the first time, Emily hated what she saw. She let James Richardson crack her armor, let him show her possibility, let him make her believe she could be something more than the woman behind the desk. And then he reminded her, intentionally or not, that she was exactly what Marcus had implied, just the receptionist. Convenient, disposable, not worth introducing to the people who mattered in his real life. Emily gathered her things and headed for the door, passing the elevator bank where memory of James waiting for her still lingered like a ghost. She pushed through the revolving doors into the November cold, pulling her coat tighter, and made herself a new promise. No more hope. No more cracks in the armor. No more believing that someone seeing her meant they actually wanted her. Some lessons, it seems, needed to be learned twice. Emily thought the story ended with her retreat into invisibility. She thought she'd learned her lesson about hope and vulnerability and men who made promises with their presence, but not their words. She was wrong, because 3 days later, Sarah pulled her into the security office with footage from the 15th floor, footage that revealed truths neither of them had told her. And Emily realized that sometimes the biggest twist isn't what people hide from you, but what they're hiding from themselves.
Monday morning arrived with freezing rain that turned Seattle streets into rivers of gray.
Emily showed up at 6:30 instead of her usual 7, needing the extra time to rebuild her professional composure before the building filled with people. Before James arrived. She'd spent the weekend in her apartment, determinedly not thinking about him. She'd deep-cleaned her already clean space, meal prepped 2 weeks' worth of identical lunches, reorganized her closet by color and season, anything to keep her mind occupied, to keep the hurt at bay, to remind herself that this was fine. She was fine. She'd been fine before James Richardson, and she'd be fine after him. The lie was getting harder to believe. Sarah arrived at 7, took one look at Emily's face, and wordlessly handed her a coffee with extra cream. Comfort in a cup. They didn't talk about it. There was nothing left to say. Sarah had warned her. Emily hadn't listened. Now Emily was paying the price for wanting something more than what she had. James came through the lobby at 7:45, 10 minutes late. He looked worse than Emily had ever seen him. Not just tired, but hollow, like something vital had been scooped out of him. He glanced toward the reception desk, caught Emily's eye for just a second, and something passed between them. Pain, maybe. Regret. Then Emily looked away, back to her computer screen, and James continued to the elevators alone. The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Emily processed deliveries, checked in visitors, answered phones, and maintained her pleasant professional mask. She'd worn this mask for 5 years. It should have been easy to slip back into. Instead, it felt like wearing someone else's skin. At 11 o'clock, Sarah appeared at the reception desk with an unusual expression. Excitement mixed with something darker, more complicated. "I need you to come with me now. It's important," Sarah said quietly. Emily glanced at the lobby. A few people in the waiting area, but nothing urgent. "Sarah, I can't just leave the desk." "Yes, you can. I already called Jenna from the 14th floor to cover for 15 minutes. Em, please, you need to see this." The urgency in Sarah's voice cut through Emily's resistance. She followed Sarah to the security office, a small room behind the lobby filled with monitors showing various angles of the building. Sarah closed the door, pulled up a chair for Emily, and opened her tablet. "I'm going to show you something, and I need you to know that I debated for 2 days whether to show you this, but you're my best friend, and you deserve to know the truth, even if it's complicated." Emily's stomach tightened. "Sarah, what?" "Just watch." Sarah pressed play on footage from the 15th floor hallway. The timestamp read Friday afternoon, around 1 p.m., right after Emily's confrontation with James on the rooftop. The video showed James and Victoria standing outside the Richardson Tech office, and even without sound, their body language screamed conflict. Victoria was gesturing sharply, her elegant composure cracking into something harder. James stood with his arms crossed, shaking his head. Then Victoria moved closer, putting her hand on James's chest, intimate, possessive. James stepped back, removing her hand deliberately. "Wait," Sarah said, pausing the video. She switched to a different camera angle, this one from inside the office, a camera Emily didn't know existed in tenant spaces. "Before you ask, yes, this is legal. All tenants sign agreements allowing security cameras in common areas of their leased spaces. Most people forget about them." Sarah hit play again. Now they could see James and Victoria from the front, and Sarah had somehow enhanced the audio enough to make their conversation audible. "I can't keep doing this, Vic." James's voice was strained, exhausted. "We're divorced. We've been divorced for 2 years. The business arrangement doesn't change that." "The business arrangement is the only reason you still talk to me." Victoria's voice was sharp, wounded. "You cut me out of everything else." "Because he cheated on me, multiple times, with my business partner, my friend, my—" James's voice broke slightly. "You destroyed our marriage, and I've tried to be professional about the company because we both have too much invested to walk away, but that's all this is, business." "That's not what you said last month." Victoria's tone shifted, becoming calculating. "When you called me at 2 a.m, drunk and alone, telling me you'd make a mistake, that you missed me, that maybe we ended things too quickly." Emily felt her breath catch. Sarah reached over and squeezed her hand. "I was drunk," James said flatly, "and sad, and I called my ex-wife because I was too pathetic to call anyone else. That doesn't mean I want you back."
But you don't want anyone else either, do you? Victoria's laugh was bitter. That's why you're wasting time with that receptionist. She's safe, uncomplicated, someone you can play house with without real risk. Leave Emily out of this. Why? Because you actually care about her? Or because she's a convenient distraction from the fact that you're terrified of actually trying again with someone who knows the real you? Which is it? That's none of your business. It became my business when you started bringing your personal crisis into our company. Marcus told me you've been distracted, missing meetings, making decisions without consulting the board. Victoria softened slightly. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying this because I still care about you, even if you can't see that. You need to figure out what you want. Either go all in with this girl or let her go before you hurt her worse. The video showed James standing frozen, Victoria waiting for a response that never came. Finally, she gathered her things, touched his shoulder once, a gesture that looked more sad than possessive now, and left. James stood alone in the frame for a long moment, then sank into his desk chair and put his head in his hands. Sarah stopped the video. Emily sat in silence, her mind racing through everything she just witnessed. The conversation reframed everything. James hadn't been hiding her because she didn't matter. He had been hiding her because he was terrified she did matter. Because getting serious meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant potentially getting destroyed again the way Victoria had destroyed him.
There's more, Sarah said quietly. She pulled up another video, this one from Saturday morning. James entering the building alone, going to his office. The timestamp showed him staying there for 6 hours, never leaving, just sitting at his desk staring at his computer. He did the same thing Sunday, Sarah continued. Came in, sat in his office, didn't work, just sat there. I think he's been here all weekend trying to figure out what to do. Why are you showing me this? Emily's voice came out rough. Because you think he doesn't care. You think you were just convenient, just a distraction. But that's not what this looks like to me. Sarah gestured to the frozen frame of James with his head in his hands. This is a man who cares too much and doesn't know how to handle it. This is someone who's scared shitless of screwing up again. That doesn't excuse. I'm not saying it excuses anything. I'm saying you both deserve to know the whole truth before you make decisions. Sarah closed the tablet. Victoria was right about one thing. James needs to figure out what he wants. But Em, you need to figure out what you want too, because I've watched you for 3 years build these walls around yourself, telling yourself you're fine being invisible. Then James came along and you let him see you, really see you. And yeah, it went sideways. But are you going to let that send you back into hiding? Or are you going to fight for something real? Emily wanted to argue, to say it wasn't that simple, that Sarah didn't understand. But the truth was Sarah understood perfectly. She'd seen through Emily's defenses from day one. I don't know if I know how to fight for something, Emily admitted quietly. I've spent so long running away, from law school, from failure, from anything that might hurt me. Being invisible felt safer than being seen and rejected. And how's that working out for you? The blunt question hit home. Emily thought about her empty apartment, her identical daily routines, her 5 years of carefully maintained professional distance. Safe, lonely, empty. It's not, Emily whispered. So maybe it's time to try something different. Sarah's expression was gentle but firm. I'm not saying run to James and declare your love. I'm saying maybe have an actual conversation. Tell him what you need. Let him tell you where he's at. Stop making assumptions and start communicating like adults. What if he can't give me what I need? Then you know, and you move on. But at least you'll know you tried. Sarah stood, offering Emily her hand. Come on, your 15 minutes is up, and Jenna texts like a passive-aggressive grandmother when she has to cover too long. Emily took Sarah's hand and stood, her mind still spinning. The security footage has changed everything and nothing. James was still hiding her from his life. He was still scared and uncertain and possibly using her as a safe distraction, but he was also hurting, also trying to figure out how to be vulnerable again after being devastated. Just like Emily. As Emily returned to the reception desk and relieved a very annoyed Jenna, she caught her reflection in the glass walls again.
The invisible woman stared back, but for the first time, Emily saw something else in that reflection. Not just fear and hiding, but possibility. Choice. She could retreat back into safety, back into invisibility, back into 5 more years of pleasant professional distance, or she could do the terrifying thing. Be honest. Be vulnerable. Risk being seen completely. Risk being rejected completely. Risk everything for the possibility of something real. The lobby filled with lunch hour traffic. Emily processed people with automatic efficiency. Her mind elsewhere. At 12:15, their usual lunchtime, she made a decision. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to the number she'd been trying to forget. Rooftop, 12:30. We need to talk. Actually talk this time. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before fear could stop her, before invisibility could reclaim her. 3 minutes later, her phone buzzed. I'll be there. Emily looked at those 3 words for a long moment. Then she put her phone away, told Sarah she was taking her lunch break, and headed for the stairs. It was time to stop running. Time to stop hiding. Time to stop letting fear make her decisions for her. Whatever happened on that rooftop, at least Emily would know she tried. At least she would know that for once in her carefully invisible life, she'd chosen to be seen, even if it terrified her. Especially because it terrified her. The rooftop conversation should have brought clarity. Instead, it brought chaos. James confessed everything, his fear, his failed drunken call to Victoria, his terror that Emily would leave like everyone else had. Emily confessed her truth that she dropped out of law school not because she'd failed, but because she'd been too afraid to succeed. They were 2 broken people trying to figure out how to be whole together. They almost made it work, then Marcus appeared with news that changed everything. Victoria was buying out James's share of the company, and she was bringing a lawsuit that named Emily as the reason.
The rooftop was freezing, the November wind cutting through Emily's thin cardigan. She should have grabbed her coat, but there was no going back now. James was already there, standing by the railing with his back to her, shoulders hunched against the cold. "Hey," Emily said softly. James turned, and the raw vulnerability in his face nearly broke her resolve. "You came?" "I said I would." Emily moved closer, but maintained a distance between them. "I saw something today. Security footage from Friday. Your conversation with Victoria." James's expression shifted through surprise, embarrassment, finally landing on resignation. "Sarah showed you. She thought I deserved the truth." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, less from cold and more for armor. "You should have told me. About the drunk call, about your fears, about why you were really keeping me separate from your life." "I know, James ran his hands through his hair. "I didn't know how to explain that I was falling for you while simultaneously being terrified that I'd screw it up. That seemed like too much to put on someone I'd known for 6 weeks. You were falling for me." The past tense hurt more than it should. Was. Still. James finally met her eyes. "Emily, I'm a mess. My marriage ended because I worked too much, trusted the wrong person, ignored all the warning signs until it was too late. I promised myself I wouldn't do relationships again, wouldn't risk that kind of pain. Then you made me coffee one morning and remembered how I took it without asking, and I was gone." Emily felt something crack in her chest. Not breaking, but opening. "I dropped out of law school because I was terrified of succeeding. I got a full scholarship to Seattle University, made it through the first semester with perfect grades. Then second semester started, and I had this moment of clarity or panic, I still don't know which. I realized that if I kept going, if I actually became a lawyer, people would expect things from me. I have to be visible, competent, important. And what if I failed at that? What if I became this successful person and then couldn't maintain it? So you left before you could fail." "I left before I could succeed and then fail, which is worse, I think, more cowardly." Emily blinked back tears. "I've been invisible for 5 years because invisible people can't disappoint anyone, can't fail.
can't get hurt. And you saw me, really saw me, and it was the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. They stood in silence for a moment, two people who'd built different walls around the same fear. "We're quite a pair," James said finally, a sad smile touching his lips. "Too scared to try, too lonely not to." "James, I need to know what you want. Not what you're afraid of, not what might go wrong. What you actually want." James moved closer, close enough that Emily could see the gray in his blue eyes, the exhaustion that had become permanent, the hope fighting with fear across his features. "I want to take you to dinner with Marcus and his wife. I want to introduce you to my parents when they visit next month. I want to stop treating you like a secret and start treating you like someone who matters. Because you matter, Emily. You matter so much it scares the hell out of me." Emily felt her walls crumbling, felt hope blooming in her chest despite every instinct screaming at her to protect herself. "I want to stop hiding. I want to reapply to law school. I want to stop making myself small because I'm afraid of being big. I want—" The rooftop door slammed open. Marcus stood there, phone in hand, his face flushed with anger and something that looked like panic. "We have a problem. A big one. Victoria's filing paperwork to buy out your shares, James, and she's claiming that your relationship," he glanced at Emily, "with an employee of the building constitutes a conflict of interest that's affecting your judgment and performance." James went very still. "What?" "She's building a case that you've been distracted, missing meetings, making poor decisions, and she's using your relationship as evidence that you're not fit to run the company." Marcus looked miserable. "I'm sorry, man. I just got the email from her lawyer 20 minutes ago. This is serious. She could actually force you out." Emily's eyes flooded with ice. "I'm not an employee of Richardson Tech. I work for the building management company." Her lawyers are arguing that it's still inappropriate fraternization that's affected James's professional judgment. They're claiming he's been leaving early, working reduced hours, generally not fulfilling his obligations as CEO. It's bullshit, but it's legal bullshit. She's got documentation. James's face had gone pale. She planned this. The visit last week, the conversation about Emily being a distraction. She was building her case. "Probably," Marcus agreed grimly. "Question is, what are we going to do about it?" Emily's mind was racing. Victoria wasn't wrong. James had been leaving earlier, had been more distracted, because of Emily, because he'd been trying to have something resembling a life outside work. And now that attempted balance was being weaponized against him. "I should go," Emily said, stepping back. "This is between you two. Business stuff." "No." James caught her arm gently. "You're part of this whether we like it or not, and I'm done hiding you, done pretending you don't matter. If Victoria wants to make this about my relationship with you, then fine, let's make it about that." "James, she could take your company." "Let her try." There was steel in James's voice, the exhaustion burning away into something sharper. "Marcus, call our lawyer. I want everything documented, every hour I've worked, every meeting I've attended, every decision I've made. We're going to show that my performance hasn't suffered. If anything, it's improved because I'm not working myself into an early grave anymore." Marcus nodded slowly. "It's going to get ugly. It always was going to get ugly. Victoria doesn't know how to let go gracefully." James turned to Emily. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Is this, us, whatever we're building, is it worth fighting for? Because if we do this, if we fight back, it's going to get public. People will know, judge, make assumptions. Your job might become uncomfortable. Hell, your whole life might become uncomfortable for a while." "I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of making myself small because I'm afraid of being big. So yes, James, this is worth fighting for. Not just you. Us, the possibility of us, the possibility of being someone who tries instead of someone who hides." James' expression transformed, relief and determination flooding his features. "Okay then. Marcus, make the calls. Emily, I need you to document everything too. Our interactions, the timeline, anything that shows this is a genuine relationship and not some impulsive distraction." "On it," Marcus said, already typing on his phone. "James, this is either really brave or really stupid." "Probably both. but I'm done letting fear make my decisions. As Marcus disappeared back into the building, already barking instructions into his phone, James pulled Emily into his arms. She went willingly, letting herself be held, letting herself be visible. "I'm scared," Emily whispered against his chest. "Me too. But I think that's the point. The things worth having are always scary." They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd built different walls around the same fear. The battle with Victoria took 3 months. It was messy, public, and exactly as uncomfortable as promised. But James's documentation was thorough, his performance record was strong, and Victoria's case ultimately fell apart under scrutiny. The truth was simple. James was a better CEO when he had a life outside work, not worse. Victoria eventually dropped the lawsuit and sold her shares to an outside investor. She left James's life for good, taking her bitterness and her manipulations with her. Emily reapplied to law school, got accepted, started classes while still working at the reception desk because visible didn't mean reckless, it meant brave. Brave enough to try while still being practical. Sarah stood as Emily's maid of honor 18 months later, when Emily and James got married on that same rooftop where they'd both learned to stop hiding. The ceremony was small, intimate, witnessed by people who actually knew them, not the invisible versions they'd pretended to be, but the real, flawed, trying their best versions. "You know what I realized?" Emily said to James during their first dance, the Seattle skyline glowing behind them. "What's that?" Being invisible wasn't about being safe. It was about being dead while still breathing. I'd rather risk everything and feel alive than hide forever and feel nothing. James kissed her softly. "Best decision I ever made was stopping at your desk that first morning. Best decision I ever made was actually looking up when you did." They danced under the stars. Two formerly invisible people who'd found each other in the marble and glass lobby of an ordinary building, who'd learned that the scariest thing wasn't failure. It was never trying at all. And somewhere in the building below, a new receptionist sat at Emily's old desk, checking in tenants, making coffee, staying invisible. Maybe one day someone would see her too. Maybe one day she'd choose to be seen. But that was a different story. This one was complete.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.